It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and Joe Dolan.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eating Podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Podcast. We are, of course, presented by DraftKings. Thank goodness for those dudes. They're the biggest reason why we have all these shows. Remember, if you're playing best ball, you need to go on the DraftKings app, use the code Ross, as well as if you ever want to place a wager on the DK Sportsbook, that same code Ross. Verified. By the way, speaking of best ball, we do have some new contestants. I will get into that momentarily. Really fired up for today's show because tomorrow is August. We have a preseason game tomorrow night. I absolutely love the Hall of Fame game because it's just like, I don't want to sound all Jim Harbaugh-y here, but it's like a rebirth. It's incredible. I absolutely love it. So that's awesome. Programming note, Joe Dolan is off this week. He's got family in town and he's doing stuff with them. Good for Joe. We will start into the Tears of Dolan next week, which is our most popular episodes where he breaks down every position over the next month based on tiers, right? So receivers, running backs, tight ends, I said that already, quarterbacks. He will tiered rank them, which is very, very valuable as you guys are getting into some of your season-long leagues. Filling in for Joe today, my new guy, Jared Smola. You can check him out on social media like I've been doing over the last week or so, at Smola DS. Jared came highly recommended by multiple people. Show today. Jared's been with Draft Sharks, ever since you graduated college, Jared?
I started while I was still in college. Took a full-time job when I graduated, so I have legitimately never had a real job. This is all I've ever done.
Hey, me neither, bro. Welcome to the party, pal. It's awesome, isn't it? And so here's what's interesting, connection with Jared. You went to St. John Fisher College, right?
Bills camp.
Oh, okay, so would you ever go, and you're from Rochester, so would you ever go to Bill's training camp when it was up there?
Oh, yeah, I still do. I mean, it's still there. It's 10 minutes from my house, so I can kind of pop over whenever I want. It's great.
Oh, that is awesome. Yeah, I loved having training camp there. Bills fans, amazing. I found out last week that my first game for CBS this year is the Bills home opener, which is like, that game is like a festival. I mean, there's so many cars and people there. It's absolutely incredible. It's by far always the best weather game. I can remember, Jared, this is just side note that people might like. So we stay, I don't know if they still do, but we used to stay at a hotel out by the mall. What's it called? The Galleria, out like in Buffalo somewhere, at like 20 minutes from Orchard Park, right? 30 minutes. I had no idea what I was getting into for the first home game against the Patriots in 2003. It was the season opener. I didn't realize, first of all, I didn't know how to get to the stadium from the hotel. Secondly, I didn't realize how bad the traffic would be. Like, I was legitimately concerned I was going to be late. I was rolling down my window being like, I'm a player. I'm playing in the game. Like, I need to get to the stadium. I had they should have given us better directions on how to get to the stadium. But it was by the way, we beat the Patriots 31-0 in that game. We had gotten Lawyer Malloy from them like 3 days earlier. We smashed them. Sam Adams was on the cover of Sports Illustrated returning a Brady pick, I think. Yeah, it must have been a Brady pick for a touchdown. It was awesome. Anyway, I digress. Here's what we're doing with Jared. There's some news since last week we'll dive into. Then I love when you get, especially a different voice, to hear guys that he's higher on than the consensus, right? Kind of where their ADP is right now, and guys that he's lower on than the consensus. Like, what's the good in you just coming on and saying, yeah, I think he's about where he should be? Like that doesn't provide any value. Speaking of value, I think I might have forgotten to do the rest of the best ball guys for best ball draft 2. We have several entries. Best ball draft 1 is going on as we speak, which is awesome. But Sean Maloney, he took advantage of our code over at Raycon and got the earbuds. Sean is part of our next best ball draft. I'll be doing the rest of the contestants over the next couple weeks. So rate and review on social media. Rate and review the podcast. Email it to me, ross@rosstucker.com. If Maloney's 4, then it looks like we have 6 more spots for our second and final DraftKings best ball draft. All right, I just talked a lot, so I'm glad I can now talk to you, Jared. Let's talk about some of the news. There is injury news, and this is significant. I would say maybe rehab news. Nick Chubb is sprinting and cutting. It's interesting because I saw where Dr. Chow, Sports Injury Central, they gave him a 6 score, Sports Injury Central score of 31. That's pretty low, but curious to hear your thoughts, Jared, on what you're doing with Chubb in drafts right now.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like Chubb is trending in the right direction, right? I think especially the cutting aspect of that is pretty key. Is coming off what was a really nasty knee injury. Like, this was not like a normal ACL. This was multi-ligament stuff. He had 2 surgeries. The second one was not till November, so I think that really delays the recovery timeline. And you listen to everything coming out of Cleveland, from that front office, from that coaching staff. They've been very cautious about when they expect him back. So I'm not expecting Nick Chubb to play week 1. I think he's going to open the season on the PUP list, miss at least the first 4 games, if not more. But his ADP is on the rise. He is up to running back 29 in the latest ADP on DraftSharks. That's too pricey for me, for a guy who, again, I think could miss half the season. And even when he comes back, is he the same Nick Chubb? I'd kind of bet against that. So I'm still avoiding Nick Chubb in drafts for the most part right now.
I wonder sometimes? I wonder, you and I, we live this, right? I always wonder with ADP, a lot of people doing these drafts are not, as diehard as we are. I wonder sometimes, how many people, A, forget he even was hurt, B, no, he got hurt, but he got hurt early in the year. He'll be fine. They don't really know what you just said about the multiple injury, the surgeries, the multiple torn ligaments. They just remember Nick Chubb got hurt last year, but he's back this year. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and honestly, I think people drafting in July are tend to be pretty diehard, right? I think as you get into your quote unquote home leagues in late August and even early September, I think Chubb might even go earlier than this, just because the name brand thing with Nick Chubb's been so good for so long. So I wouldn't be surprised if you get into home leagues and he's going even higher than our RB29. I think he's a pretty easy avoid for me.
Speaking of AFC North running backs, curious to get your thoughts on what's going on in Cincinnati, because there's opportunity there. Chase Brown, Zach Moss. How are you kind of reading those tea leaves and handling those guys?
Yeah, this is a key. This is maybe the most important backfield battle to watch in camp, I think. I mean, this Cincinnati offense, assuming good health from Joe Burrow this year, I mean, they're going to be a top 10 offense, if not a top 5 offense. So there are going to be fantasy points to be had in this backfield. We're trying to figure out whether it's going to go to Zach Moss or Chase Brown. As of a month ago, I was kind of on the Moss side of this. I think you look at, Brown was flashy last year. He is he's a speedy back. He made a couple big plays, but you look at his overall performance last year, it wasn't that great. He was like a boomer bust player, right? He had the big plays, but he had a lot of unsuccessful runs. But the Bengals coaching staff has been talking him up for much of the offseason now. We're hearing that Brown has been taking more first-team reps than Zach Moss early in training camp. So I'm starting to come around to the idea of maybe Chase Brown even leading this backfield in total touches and total fantasy points. So he's a guy I've started to draft. You can still get him, round 7, round 8, round 9. I think he has upside from that cost.
Who do you think Who do you think would be the third down back? Is it definitely Chase, or is that up for debate?
So I that's going to come down to pass protection, I would assume, because I think coaches tend to trust Zach Moss in pass pro, but he's never been a great pass catcher out of the backfield. Chase Brown has. Chase Brown had some at Illinois. Again, he had at least one long catch and run last year. So I think that job is Brown's to lose if he can, prove to be reliable in pass pro.
What about wide receiver news? We just found out yesterday DJ Moore got a huge new extension with the Bears. I mean, we already knew he was really good. I guess, Jared, do you take into account contract news? And I guess I would say in particular guys that get contracts. I know there's a whole other discussion about CeeDee Lamb and Ayuk and the guys that want contracts. What about the guys that get contracts?
Yeah, to me, that stuff is less impactful for the current season redraft stuff and more impactful for dynasty, right? If we're thinking longer term, like someone like DJ Moore just has that stability now where he's going to be, particularly with DJ Moore, like he is now tied to Caleb Williams for multiple years, which if you believe in Caleb Williams, which I do, that definitely helps DJ Moore's dynasty, longer term stability.
Any other wide receiver news, the first week of camp that kind of jumped out to you at all, Jared?
Yeah, the buzz is not stopping on Jameson Williams. There was a lot of hype on him in the spring, and he's reportedly kind of rolled that over into training camp, continuing to play well. Josh Reynolds gone from Detroit now, so the runway is clear for Jameson Williams to be that number 2 wide receiver for Detroit. And this is a Detroit offense. This is one of my favorite notes on Detroit and really in all of fantasy football right now. Detroit only has 3 outdoor games all season, and one of them is San Francisco. So this is not a team that's going to be dealing with weather for much of the year, which is especially good when your quarterback's Jared Goff, because we know he tends to struggle outside. So this is a Lions offense I want to buy into. I want pieces of it, and Jameson Williams still goes fairly late in drafts. Again, I do think he obviously has that big play upside. So I think Jameson Williams is someone I've been targeting pretty aggressively in drafts lately.
Especially with that offense, especially with the guys they have underneath to take coverage, Jahmyr Gibbs and Laporta and Amon-Ra. It's a really good point. My point would be that Labatt Blue Light is delicious. They actually sell a ton of Labatt Blue Light in Detroit, which makes sense because it's made in Buffalo. My favorite light beer, always enjoy responsibly beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. All right, let's get to some of these guys, Jared, that you're higher on or lower on. And I had Jared send me the list so I could know who to tee him up on. And I love it because I firmly agree with at least the first couple that we're going to dive into here, starting with Commanders quarterback Jayden Daniels.
Yeah, I mean, running quarterbacks remain a cheat code in fantasy football. I looked at, so over the last 10 years, there have been 31 quarterbacks that ran for 500 plus yards in a season. 65% of those guys finished top 10 in fantasy points. 45% of them finished top 5 in fantasy points. 35% of them finished top 3. So if you can run for 500 plus yards, you're a good bet to be top 10. You have a chance to finish top 5, top 3. To me, Jayden Daniels, if he stays healthy, is a lock to run for 500 plus yards. I think he'll blow by that easily, assuming good health. He ran for well over 1,100 yards last year at LSU, so he has that going for him. I think he's underrated as a passer as well. I mean, you look at the passing numbers he put up at LSU last year; they were huge. He was especially awesome throwing deep. Daniels led the FBS last year in throws 20 plus yards downfield in completion rate, yards per attempt, touchdowns, passer rating. He was the best deep passer in college football last year. So you kind of combine the deep passing with that rushing ability. I think right out of the gate, he's a good bet to be a top 10 fantasy quarterback, if not, top 6 or 7.
Totally agree. Huge fan of Jayden Daniels. I've said it before, Jared. I don't pretend to be like a quarterback guru, it's his footwork or whatever. So I brought so many of them on the Ross Tucker football podcast before the draft. I'm saying, just off the top of my head, Greg Cosell, Phil Simms, Chase Daniel, Sean King, like quarterback guys, right? Orlovsky, I think maybe Lewis Riddick, they all raved about Jayden Daniels.
Yep.
A couple of them said they liked Jayden Daniels more than Caleb Williams, but even the ones that wouldn't say that, like I might have a certain sandwich ranked ahead of a second sandwich, but like you can tell when someone's talking about them which one they're really more excited about. You know what I mean? Like It's almost like they were afraid to say that they like Jayden Daniels more. Like they had to say, yeah, Caleb Williams is my number one guy. But the way they talked about Jayden Daniels, you could just tell that they really, really were excited about him. I actually, people keep asking me my sleeper team. I keep giving them the Commanders just because of Jayden Daniels. I mean, he is the main reason. They have more weapons than you realize. Like, they've got a D-line. Anyway, let's get to some of these running backs. You're higher on James Conner. Again, I agree.
Yeah, people like to fade James Conner because of the injury history, and I get that to an extent. But in fantasy football, points per game scoring is way more important than total points, right? Because it's a week-to-week game. If Conner misses time, you can always find someone off the waiver wire or your bench to fill in for him. So I actually like taking guys that people are afraid of because of the injury stuff. And Conner, when he's on the field, this guy just produces. He was 13th among running backs in PPR points per game last year. He was 9th in 2022, and he's currently running back 19 in ADP. So again, you're getting that injury discount. Yes, they brought in Trey Benson, the Cardinals did in the draft. You'll see how he develops, but James Conner remained awesome last year. He was 5th among 49 running backs last year in yards per carry. He was 2nd among those 49 in yards after contact per attempt. So like, unless James Conner really falls off, I don't think Trey Benson's going to eat into his volume much this season. I think Conner's going to remain the pretty clear lead back for the Cardinals.
I love James Conner. I like what I'm hearing about Marvin Harrison Jr. helping to open things up for him. They've got McBride middle of the field. Kyler Murray sounds like he knows he's kind of got to start to win football games. And so I think, Conner did what he did last year, Jared, without having Kyler for a lot of those games and the threat of Kyler running. Now, I guess he did have Dobbs for a bunch of those games, and Dobbs is a runner also, but I think a healthy Kyler only adds to what Conner can bring to the table. Speaking of health, that's the deal with Jonathon Brooks, right? I mean, everybody says he's a really good prospect, but he's coming off that injury. You're higher on him than where he's going right now.
Yeah, Brooks is RB 28 in ADP right now, so I think that's baking in this risk as he comes off the ACL tear. And the ACL tear came in November. So, a little later in the season. Brooks, as of now, is still on the PUP list, hasn't taken part in training camp yet. I think he's going to play week 1. He's still probably not a guy we want to be using in fantasy lineups like early in the season. But I think by October, he's a guy who really could, take this starting job for the Panthers and really produce, really run with it. I just really like this player. I mean, we didn't see Brooks much his first years at Texas because he was sitting behind Bijan Robinson. We're not really going to hold that against him. But last year, Brooks takes over as Texas's lead back. 114 rushing yards and 1.0 rushing touchdowns per game, 6.1 yards per carry. He also averaged 2.5 catches and 29 receiving yards per game. So he can run it. He can catch it. He's 6 foot, 216 pounds. So he has, feature back size. And I think he landed in a really nice spot. The Panthers traded up to take Brooks. So they're high on this guy. Chuba Hubbard is probably Brooks's biggest challenger for touches once Brooks is healthy. And, if Chuba Hubbard's your biggest competition for touches, I'd consider that, a mark in your favor. And then Brooks is going to be playing under Dave Canales, the Panthers' new head coach. Canales was in Tampa Bay last year. He helped Rachaad White have his breakout season. White was very busy for the Bucs, both as a runner and a pass catcher. I envision a similar role for Brooks, probably over the second half of the season once that knee injury is behind him.
Let's get to a couple receivers that you are higher on than the consensus as well, Jared. And we'll start with T. Higgins. He isn't a franchise tag year, huge contract year for him. He's certainly going to want the ball, that's for sure.
Exactly. Yeah, I like the little extra motivation for a guy playing on the franchise tag. To me, T. Higgins is basically the James Conner of wide receivers where people are afraid to draft him because he does tend to, miss time. He gets nicked up a bunch, which can be kind of annoying. But, similar to James Conner, when T. Higgins is on the field, the guy produces, Last year was a rough year for the Bengals with Higgins injuries and Burrow's injuries. I'm kind of giving the Bengals a mulligan for last year, but go back to the previous 2 years. Higgins finished 14th among wide receivers in PPR points per game in 2021, 13th in 2022, and now he's wide receiver 28 in ADP. So I just think he's going to easily beat his price tag when he's on the field this year.
What about DeAndre Hopkins? It's funny because you almost forget about DeAndre Hopkins. Like I like if I went down the street and asked 100 football fans who DeAndre Hopkins plays for, I'm not sure that many of them could name it, right?
Yeah.
And then obviously with the Titans getting Calvin Ridley, that in people's mind pushes DeAndre Hopkins down even more. I mean, the amount of money they paid Ridley. So why are you higher? I guess you're higher on him, Jared, because he's still good and he's still consistent, whereas everybody else is kind of concerned about age and quarterback issues and Ridley and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, Hopkins is 32 years old now, but he was just still really good last year. It's funny. Hopkins actually beat Ridley last year in most of the wide receiver metrics I look at: yards per route run, Pro Football Focus receiving grade. Hopkins was better than Ridley last year, so I'm actually expecting Hopkins to still lead Tennessee in targets this season, and that's a big argument for Hopkins. This guy, wherever he's gone, he's played on a few different teams now. He just draws targets. 27% target share last year. That was the 11th highest among wide receivers. Hopkins has now seen a target share of 27% or higher in 6 of his last 7 seasons. Just wherever he's playing, the quarterbacks target this guy. I think that's going to continue this year. And the other big thing with Hopkins in Tennessee is brand new coaching staff in Tennessee. Mike Vrabel out, Brian Callahan in. The Titans were one of the run heaviest offenses under Mike Vrabel. I think with Callahan there, who comes over from Cincinnati, 4 of Callahan's 5 Bengals offenses were top 12 in pass rate. Now, Will Levis is not Joe Burrow, so I'm not sure Callahan's going to go that pass heavy in Tennessee. But the point is, they're going to throw a lot more than they did last year. So even though Hopkins has more target competition with Calvin Ridley there, I think the overall increase in pass volume in Tennessee is going to keep Hopkins' targets really strong.
Some of the guys you're a little bit lower on than where they're going right now include C.J. Stroud. Just too rich for your blood or sophomore slump?
No, this is less about Stroud and more about his price compared to what I think are similar quarterbacks. To me, Stroud projects close to guys like Joe Burrow and Dak Prescott, and those guys are available a round or 2 rounds later in fantasy drafts. So for me, it's just tough to pull the trigger on Stroud. I mean, I know I can get someone like Burrow a round later, someone like Dak Prescott 2 rounds later.
Alvin Kamara in New Orleans wants more money, but I loved his comment. I'm not letting him take my money. He's not getting fined the $50,000. He is there. Man, they have some O-line issues, Jared. They really do.
Yeah, the Ryan Ramczyk loss is huge. The O-line looked iffy even before that. So that's a major concern. That's one of my reasons to be down on Kamara. The other one, though, is just the end comes quickly for running backs in the NFL. Kamara is 29 now. We already started to see signs of decline last year. He actually set career lows in missed tackles forced per attempt and yards after contact per attempt. So he's declining as a runner. He remained good as a receiver last year, but it's like, when does that start to go too? If he's already declining as a runner, when does he start to decline as a receiver? So I'm just kind of out on Kamara. I'm going to let someone else take, the running back who's 29 years old, and I think is just going to kind of continue to head south.
With that O-line, though, Derek Carr might be throwing him like a zillion checkdowns this year. We'll have to see how that plays out. A couple receivers that you're a little bit concerned about: Devontae Adams, George Pickens.
Yeah, Adams, it's always scary with a guy like Devontae Adams, who's, is a future Hall of Famer. It's tough to bet against that. But, he is 31 years old now, and we saw signs of decline last year. He had, some low marks in yards per route run and yards per target. It was his lowest yards per route run since 2017, his lowest yards per target since 2015. So I have concerns about, him declining as a player. And then it's obviously the situation, quarterback concerns in Vegas. We don't even know who's going to be under center for them week 1, whether it's going to be Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew. additional target competition now with Brock Bowers in town. And then you look at the price tag. I mean, Devontae Adams is still wide receiver 9 in ADP. I'll take, younger guys like Drake London, Chris Olave, even Marvin Harrison Jr. over Devontae Adams.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that as well. Jared, terrific work. Excellent. Check him out on social media at Smola DS. That was fantastic. I'm stuffed. We're done.
Thanks for tuning in to Fantasy Feast. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.